Hi, I'm Barbara Palmer. I want to invite you into this conversation that I'm having with Tahira Endean to the right and Claire Harrington. And I have invited them to come and talk. I am senior editor at Convene magazine, and I've invited Claire and Tahira to come talk today. Both of them are what I think of as event technologists, and I don't know if that's, but both of them are, Tahira is the event marketing manager for Quickmobile, and Claire is the communications manager for Social Tables. And both of those are event technology companies that are growing at enormous rates. But also they're both CMPs, and both of them have a lot of experience in event design. Tahira has worked for more than 2 decades in she's worked on 3 continents, everything from the Olympics to incentive to medical association. And Claire had a very fast-paced beginning in the industry in Washington, D.C., where she worked both for congressmen and for a lobbyist firm doing events. And so very high pressure, high intensity kinds of work with a lot of different areas of expertise. So we have been doing our meetings market survey this is the 24th year. Wow. And so it's a big survey, and we look at numbers in a lot of different ways. And we just really thought it would be wonderful to invite CMPs and people who are really at the thrumming center of the industry, but also have the experience in event design. And when they look at the figures, it's not an abstraction to them. They can put real things on it. So one of the survey is in our March issue. One of the big takeaways, I think, that both Claire and Tahira, I think, noted as well as we did, is that there is an uptick. There's a modest growth in the size of events, but on the other side, there is a more than modest growth in expenses. So I just wondered if you guys could just talk a little bit about your impressions when you saw the survey, what leaped out at you, and we could just kick this around a little bit.
Sure. I think the first thing that leapt out at both of us was there's a comment that says meeting planners must always bring their A game to the job. And I think that was really that first thing. There is a lot of discussion in the industry right now about, the reality that meeting planners are business planners. And we do need to understand budgets more than anything. As much as people think that our job is very glamorous and exciting, and we're going to fantastic places, we do all of that. But we do it all on a budget that we're managing on an exponential scale. So I think that the reality is that, what we are seeing is budgets are not growing that much, or if at all. I think this study will show 27% say they're going to have more budget to work with, which means that there's a whole lot more that are not going to have more budget to work with. And yet costs keep going up. So air, hotel, food and beverage, our big costs keep going up. But everything else also goes up incrementally. So starting to manage that becomes really about understanding what matters to your event. What do you think, Claire?
I completely agree. One of the big things I think we both noted from the survey is that like you said, there are a quarter of planners who believe that their budgets will go up, which means that the remaining 75% are either operating on flat budgets or reduced budgets in a time when expenses are absolutely going through the roof with everything. So in order to manage that, there have to be some very serious considerations for how to balance, what the priority projects are, who the priority attendees are, how much money is necessary to put into things like transportation, to things like F&B. We're going to discuss in a little bit how those budgets are, having a lot of pressure to go down on them. So really, I think understanding attendee and understanding your attendees and understanding exactly what your leadership, or you, if you're the, if you're the decision maker in your organization, are looking for from your attendees. It's no longer okay to just say, hey, like, we need 100 people. Those 100 people need to be quality. They need to be able to drive your business. They need to be able to drive other business to you. And that is a real, it's a reality in today, that there's not much room for error, or not much room for, for lack of a better term, just fluff attendees. The people who are there need to add value to your organization.
Do you think that the people who are ultimately in charge of the budgets, do you think that they are realistic about the cost? Do you think that that's something that needs to happen, like a more robust understanding at all levels of organizations about the costs?
Yeah, I think that the budget, it's not just about the meeting planner being realistic. We're dealing as meeting planners with those costs every day. We're very realistic about them. But if we have a procurement department or a travel department or somebody else working with or setting our budgets that aren't working every day and seeing, the small incremental costs going up as well as new costs coming in, that's where I think the challenge comes in, is that, you're given, sort of a number at the beginning of the year, and that number isn't really necessarily based on the reality of what's happening, or if somebody chooses a destination for the incentive programs. I'll use incentive programs as an example, because we know that often those destinations are not chosen by anything other than an executive level, but they may be choosing a destination that is markedly different in budget than where you've been in the past, whether that's an airfare cost or, and not to pick on any countries, but let's say you've always gone to the Caribbean and now you decide that you're going to take your entire group and go somewhere really, different and exotic, like Bali or Dubai. That's going to fundamentally change what that budget is. And if you spread that out over, 130 people that are on your chairman's council or 600 people on a president's club as examples of numbers, that's going to make fundamental differences to your overall budget. And so understanding those at all levels becomes important.
I agree.
And then there's also the change in how we have to spend money. So, and I'll go back to my favorite example, which is from 1998, when the first presenter walked in with PowerPoint. And all of a sudden, we didn't have a $35 a day slide carousel. We had a $700 a day projector. And we had to fundamentally shift how we were presenting audiovisual. And we had to fundamentally shift how we could now use these really cool tools that are out there to deliver our content and to deliver our messages, but have budgets kept up with that? I don't know. What do you see, Claire?
This is coming from a planner who has faced many of those struggles before in trying to justify cost and trying to justify larger budgets. At the end of the day, I think what's ironic is that a lot of what our jobs are responsible for doing is educating our attendees, and we find ourselves going so quickly and running through every single piece of the puzzle so fast that we stop and we fail to remember that the people who are in the procurement departments, Tahira, the people who are in the finance departments, the executives who are there to really speak and network with the attendees, their job isn't to know these things. So I think one thing that we have to do and add, unfortunately, to our already overpacked schedule and plates as planners is to learn how to educate the people who are operating the pocketbooks. And the only way to do that, the only way to say to a VP of finance that you need an extra $15,000 to $20,000 is to show him some very serious data about why and what the return on that additional expense is. So yes, if you went to the Caribbean at a all expenses paid resort for the past 5 years, then all of a sudden you have pulled your attendees and have done a very deep dive into where they want to go, and you're trying to add value to their lives by giving them what they want instead of what you think that they want. If you can show him that 99% of them are willing to go there and drop, the fancy dinners or drop the multiple option dinners, I think this is going to be a little bit of a tangent, but we as planners sometimes tend to over offer in, anticipation of people being unhappy. And in reality, perhaps if we gave them 2 or 3 options for places to go instead of 10, and those 2 or 3 fit into a budget that we think that we can probably finagle, that might be another story. But I think it all goes back to being able to analyze your attendees, analyze your events, and being able to produce that data in a very high level monetary way to the people who we're trying to get on board with us. Otherwise, it all to them just sounds like spending more. It doesn't sound like solutions. It doesn't sound like more business. It doesn't sound like driving sales. So as long as we as planners can learn how to educate those people by using all of the analytical tools that are available to us today, I think that our jobs will be easier in getting them on board. I don't necessarily think that will directly correlate with budgets, but I think having people aligned so that we're in the same mental space about it will help drive the conversation maybe 2 or 3 years down the line.
Well, if we stay on that meeting and incentive path, sorry, Barbara, I was just going to say, if we stay on that meeting and incentive path, if we start as planners working hand in hand really with our sales and marketing teams to figure out if we want to go somewhere that is more expensive because we know that is going to be more rewarding for people, then how do you have to change that qualification process? And become part of that bigger business discussion of what do sales need to look like in order for that to actually happen. And sometimes I think that we're missing that, and we talk about this often, but that seat at the table to have those discussions and to make sure that that there is an understanding that we are part of the overall business driver as meeting professionals. We are not just people who are coordinating logistics really at any point in the game. It's, the logistics becomes almost, a very small part of your job compared to managing your budgets, creating programs, doing all of those things that are going to be create those touch points that give that sense of reward or recognition that are so important to those sales meetings and incentive trips.
Absolutely. And I think, Tahira, what you're kind of alluding to also is attendee loyalty. Like, how do you get that person who's going to commit dollars year over year over year? I read an article that said marketing is dead because of loyalty. It's been replaced by loyalty, which is true, right? Community engagement is such a massive, talking point these days. General attendee engagement, how you can develop these relationships that are so much deeper than just the hours that they spend with you on a trip or at an event. Looking at who your attendee is and what the net cost of that attendee is to your entire year, I think that's a very interesting, could end up cutting down your attendee goals, but perhaps our attendee goals are incorrect. Perhaps saying we want 20,000 people at a massive event isn't necessarily the best answer, right? I do a lot of content, and there's a funny quote that I like to say, and it's about action, not eyeballs. So sure, you have 20,000 people in the room. How many of them are actually providing value to your company?
Well, and if you look at, whether it's a company or now if we look at the flip side of that of an association, with an association, do you really want just bums in seats, or do you really want to have bums in seats that become your advocates, that become your loyal, those people who are really going to not only return year over year, but are going to really understand the value of being part of your organization, because what you're giving them is actually now what they want discovered by all of this data that we're finding.
Right.
Which I think is really important.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think it's a good segue into just talking about what to me was one of the most startling statistics, is that 74% of the respondents in the survey have been asked to cut back on food and beverage. And food and beverage is, I think, a touch point. It's like, it's emotional. I mean, we think in terms of amounts, we think in terms of trends, we think in terms of taste, but at the bottom, it has such a psychic role that it plays, and so I think so anyway, I'd just like to hear what you all think about the fact that people are really being asked to cut back on F&B, and at the same time they're really asked to do more with F&B? And what maybe are some of the strategies or way that you can think about it that'll help you navigate that?
Well, I have a lot to say about this one, so feel free to interrupt me at any point in time.
Okay.
But for me, one of the key things is I think that we generally use food and beverage quite badly at meetings. And maybe that sounds harsh, but I think that if we really look at taking care of our attendees and looking at the wellness of attendees, we haven't done a good job of that traditionally with food and beverage at almost any kind of meeting. And we tend to really default to low cost, but big quantity white flour, white sugar items. And whether that's pastas or rolls or pastries in the morning or whatever it is. So we're spending a lot of money on something that actually gives nothing back to the attendee fundamentally. And by fundamentally, part of that is taste and culture, but really part of that is just how do you navigate your way through what is typically a 10 to 18 hour day if you're not actually nutritionally sound. And so I think that if we were started off by thinking how we were spending our money better, first of all, and really working with our venues and caterers on a nutritional level, that to me is one sort of first step. And then I think another part of that is looking at what do people really eat? And, Shauna McKinley, who we all know and think is amazing because she has done a lot of work with people around the sustainability of foods. And one of her key clients they work with, what they did is they looked at what were people actually eating on the buffet and then working with their venues to still have probably the same menu, but not the same quantities of the items that people didn't eat as much of. They saved over $100,000 by paying attention year to year on their quantities. And just, things like less potato salad because people didn't take as much or whatever those items were, but just really paying attention to that. And so I think, when we look at how do we cut down food and beverage, we can do it in ways that actually improve our meeting. And there's also some great examples this year, really, that we're starting to see of, using ugly vegetables or inglorious fruits and vegetables, where we're taking things that cost less fundamentally, because once you start cutting it up and chopping it and peeling it and putting it into something, it doesn't really matter what it looked like at the beginning. And nobody knows. It doesn't taste different. It hasn't gone bad. It's just not the most desirable from a selling perspective. So we're starting to see ways that people are just being smarter in their food and beverage spend, which I think is fascinating and amazing. And over to Claire, because I could keep talking.
Yeah.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think, this is kind of lame. I don't know if this term exists, but it's consumption analytics, right? So we had a client event in January at a beautiful hotel, had amazing food. BEO was for 75% of the actual attendees. I brought, thank goodness there was the waiver that I could bring back to my company so they didn't just throw it out. I would bet 80% of the food that was on that buffet line, gorgeous, high quality food, was wasted in a sense because people at happy hours don't eat. They don't eat. Even scaling back to that 75%, I mean, I could have scaled back to 25% and probably still had that type of those types of amounts left. I mean, to the point where literally we're throwing another one in the next week or so, and I've gone down to 33%. I hope that's not a massive mistake, but we're kind of testing the waters with our attendees, all of whom are in the hospitality industry. So all of whom know, what's expected to be at a buffet. I think one thing that's interesting though, is how do you, if you cut back that much, and you're also trying to do it not only to conserve food waste, but also to conserve resource waste, going from, let's say, a 2 6-foot tables worth of food buffet to a 1 foot 6-foot table, like you have to learn how to present the food in a beautiful way as well. So kind of like Tahira said, you're cutting back, you're scaling back, maybe you're offering different types of foods that people aren't super familiar with, but it's in your presentation. It's a little bit of a, not smoke and mirrors necessarily, but how do you get people to look at the buffet that's the exact same food, it's just much more pared down, and still engage with it and still say, oh, like this is a beautiful event, this event is worth it. So yeah, I think consumption analytics is really important. And to be honest, I think that a lot of that onus needs to fall on the venues. You know, these BEOs that people put in and the food quality or the food quantities that are put out are based specifically on either the planner saying, I want X percentage of the people who will be in attendance, or I want X head count to be, you know, appropriate with your serving sizes. And I don't think that venues do a good job of that. And I think that it's a tragedy from the venue's perspective, because they're watching that food be thrown away. Many hospitality workers in these venues are not having the opportunity to take this food home to their families. We aren't having the opportunity to be able to donate it due to, you know, health code risks. It's astounding to me how much food waste there is in the industry. And I'm sure that there are many studies that have the exact numbers, but I bet it would make all of us sick to learn how much money is basically dollar bills in the trash can. And good quality food. Back to what Tahira was saying, nutrition. Like, nutrition is a massive issue in our world. To be able to take a 6 foot table worth of food and throw it in the trash can because there's literally no way to do anything with it that's legal it's astounding to me.
Well, and I think that that's starting to change. And I think that, you know, there's that program out of New York, the Rock and Wrap It Up, that is doing a fantastic job. And I think that we're starting to see, especially in larger cities, a lot more ways that we can actually take that food. You know, we've done it in Vancouver almost since the convention center has been open, where they work with local organizations. So I think that that is starting to change. There's more Good Samaritan laws in place and things so that we are able to do that. But it is still definitely a concern. And I think one of the things that we talked about was the reality that if you go into a restaurant now, the statistic is that, you know, what's on your plate is 4 times more food than it was in the 1950s. Well, no wonder we're double the size.
Right.
You know, it's a crazy statistic. We simply don't need to eat as much as we have out there. So, I think it's reframing 2 things. A few things. It's reframing client expectations of what food will be. It is reframing planners' expectations of how much you actually, you know, planners never want to see lineups and they never want to see waste, or they never want to see food run out. So they don't really see the waste because it goes back of house. And, you know, so that becomes one of those things where then the venues are always trying to overcompensate. So it just becomes really a fundamental shift in how we need to think about food and beverage. I think if 74% are being asked to reduce budgets, then 74% need to figure out ways to work with their venue partners and their catering partners to reduce some of that waste. And I think that, you know, I've worked with hotels where the client has said, I would rather run out of food than throw it away because I know everyone's going to get enough to eat. And the hotel is, you know, or we'll do what you just said, Claire, with, you know, putting out 50% or 30%. You know, and even if we do, you know, a plated dinner for everybody who's there, and then we say we're going to do a dessert buffet afterwards, just put out, you know, 60% because we know that's all that's going to eat it. They'll still put out 100% because they don't want it to be perceived that they ran out of food.
Right.
And it's a fundamentally backwards way to think when we start to think about, you know, Dan Barber, who wrote this great book, The Third Plate, you know, talks about how there is actually, globally, there is enough calories produced from food to feed the entire world very comfortably. But because of the way that we distribute our food, and we are a shining example of how not to do it here, because of how we distribute our food, we also have 2 billion people a day that go hungry. So how do we really fundamentally work to change that? I don't know.
Well, you mentioned education earlier, and I just think this is this is a really great opportunity to educate. I mean, we didn't get to this point where we expect this bounty overnight. So I think a concerted effort. So, well, I want to thank you all. I enjoyed this so much, and I'd love to do this again. I hope you guys do too. And we can talk about some more issues on the meetings market survey in the world of events, the events industry. So thank you so much, and
thanks for having us.
Yeah, it was great. It was great, you guys. It was wonderful. Got me thinking. All right,
we'll be back.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.